Thank you. Thank you? Okay. I kind of wish Bill would let me write my own intros sometimes. It's a good picture of me. I'm also going to start on a slideshow. This is a picture of me. This was actually the best picture of me ever taken, which I know because after the photographer took it, she whispered to Tanya Lord, who's a real person, that I looked like a model, which I don't, so it was memorable to me. But also memorable at this time was this is just as I was shifting over to data strategy. A move that I made because I was in love with the idea of behavioral analytics and that our customers, through their actions, were talking to us. And we just needed to listen and improve the experience. So when they showed us that they had a preference for something, you gave them a little bit more. If they didn't like something, you took it away. But I've been struggling with this category of problems where it seems like where people are showing a preference, but I feel like my intuition is that if we gave them a little bit more, it would backfire. Except I've been wrong over and over. An example, Kendrick Lamar, who I manage, had a famous beef, had a big beef, sorry, burgers are next. With Drake, where he had a single that was, you'll need to look it up, says some pretty pointed things. He went on to host the halftime show, and if you were to ask me, should he play the Drake is a pedophile song, I would have said no. Janet Jackson, MIA, FCC licenses being taken away. It's the third rail you don't want to touch. But I was wrong. It was wildly popular. His streams went up. There was no backlash. People loved the conflict. But that's music. What about burgers and CEOs? The McDonald's CEO tried to experiment with some short-form video, did not enthusiastically eat his burger, and an internet pylon took place. Now, if I was at Burger King, my intuition said, let your competitor hang on their own. Don't dive in, you might create a backlash of sympathy. And once again, I was wrong. The Burger King CEO got sloppy with a Whopper, and people loved it. In-store traffic for Burger Kings went up 9% in March after this. McDonald's stayed flat. There was no backlash. I was the only person sympathetic to that nice man. Politicians have decided that the best way to show authenticity is to swear. If you've been looking at their tweets, they say the D word, sometimes they say the F word. And I actually don't know if that's effective, but they clearly believe this is the best way to signify their authenticity. But again, if one of the CFOs or CEOs of your company were about to have an earnings call and ask me, how many times should I curse? I would probably say 0. And I would be wrong once again. CEOs have been cursing more often in earnings calls, and rather than it being a sign of buffoonery, this study says it's a sign of conviction. There has been no backlash. It shows off authenticity. One side where I would have guessed I would have been right is we read surveys all the time. Gen Z consistently says, not just Gen Z, all surveys are showing that people want original content. And so I would say you don't want to rehash Pirates of the Caribbean 12. You should give them original content. But that's not actually what they wanted. This is post-Marvel, and it's still 83% of the franchise releases making up Hollywood's box office, what people are actually spending money on. Netflix just had one of its worst 2-week periods ever, where none of the top 10 shows in streaming were original content. People expressed that interest, but they were telling you something completely different. This bothers me being on the wrong side of this with my intuition. And there were some explanations for it that weren't convincing to me, purely cell phones or social media causing these. And so I was looking for some sort of framework that I could understand. It came to me from one of my favorite podcasters. Joe Weisenthal is from Bloomberg. He has this Odd Lots financial podcast. And he explains it pretty provocatively that what's happening is our digital tools have changed us by making us more oral. And what that means is not just that we're communicating more with our voice, though with podcasts and short-form video, that could be obvious, but that all of our interactions are very conversational. And because we're in conversation so much, it's pushing to the forefront behaviors and traits that were much more common before reading and writing arrived onto the scene. Behaviors like this enthusiasm for conflict, the rap battles, this ostentatiousness on Instagram, these things where you would assume understatedness would play better and it's not, and this reliance on traditional characters and storytelling to ground yourself in the scenarios. In this talk, we're going to dive into this theory because as I've learned to harness it, it's helped me, one, both stay on the right side of it, but also I think will help you in businesses because though a lot of these were cultural references, we exist in this culture and we use and are relying and being forced on in the same patterns. We're going to start off by diving into what makes oral cultures different and why would it promote some of those traits. 2, what makes literacy unique and why does it promote different ones? And then why would we even slide backwards? We're obviously still reading and writing, right? We're going to be focusing on 2 specific thinkers. One is Marshall McLuhan, who you're probably more familiar with. And he came to prominence in the 50s and 60s as people were struggling with 2 new technologies, radio and TV, and what that would mean for generations being raised on it. And he basically figured out that if we're going to try and understand what these 2 specific mediums are going to do to us, we need to understand what mediums in general do to us. One of the people that helped with that was his former student, an adorable Jesuit priest named Walter Ong. And he provided a lot of the rigor to McLuhan, who could be more of a talker. And one of the things he did, kind of to Kevin's point with NASA, where he knew that he couldn't study the future because it hadn't happened yet, but he could look backward to what he could, to previous transformations with media, most significantly when oral societies suddenly had access to reading and writing. He wrote a great book called Orality and Literacy. For some reason, they didn't pass that one out, Ryan. But he really challenges us to put ourselves in the shoes of a world where you cannot write anything down and you cannot look anything up. And the entire potential of your human knowledge exists in the tribe around you and the experiences that they're going to have and their ability to memorize it and remember it. It promotes 4, I'm covering 4 specific traits that are common in these, but obviously there's much more. 1, it's optimized for memory, right? The only way that knowledge will endure is by being remembered. You need to make it easy to remember, right? People spoke in rhythmic, easy to remember proverbs, epithets. The Odyssey is a great thing to look at, right? It was reevaluated not as the first great literary work, but we realized that it was an oral work, meaning that a bard would have been up for 4.5 hours, sticking to meter, singing the story, being able to pull pre-constructed phrases. It wouldn't be a word-for-word recreation because they couldn't even parse a specific word at the time. And of course, the Odyssey was playing the hits. These are characters people knew, that they could pull in backstory when needed to provide more context based off the reactions of the crowd. Thinking was situational instead of abstract, which I know is a fairly academic way of saying street smarts over book smarts, right? They were completely immersed in their environment. Knowledge was only valuable to them if it could help explain how to benefit from the environment or protect you from it. Because you were always around the people when you're having communications, it promoted empathy, right? As you would be talking to other people in the crowd, you would be trying to get in their good graces, affirmation, adjusting, telling them stories that you think would show that you were part of their tribe. But curiously, it created quite an agonistic culture. Agonistic meaning conflict, right? Protagonist, antagonist. Agonism is that conflict. So why would that be? Ong says proverbs and riddles are not used simply to store knowledge, but to engage others in verbal and intellectual combat. Knowledge was still power back then, and you showed off your knowledge by being able to pull the best proverb at the right time, by being able to tell the story that explained the situation, by specifically putting down the other and showing them that their story sucked and you were better. Being loud got you attention, and that was promoted. They were responding to what got attention. And so that you can see that thread coming through. Now that we have these algorithms that are pushing us into one conversation, people are responding to what is getting them attention, and it's benefiting them. Another aspect is kind of being immersed in your environment is knowledge is only useful if it does explain your environment. Ong goes on to tell this story of British researchers who went to the Ganja tribe in Ghana and recorded their origin story. Their founder had 7 kids in that story, representing the 7 divisions of the state. They left and came back 60 years later to re-record it. This time the founder had 5 sons, representing the 5 current divisions of the state. The knowledge was political. They tell this story so that each people in the audience know that they're not just part of one tribe, but have a common ancestry. This type of political knowledge you can find in many different places in early literature. This comes from the Bible, but also there's the famous Iliad shipbuilding scene. That is to let the audience know that, hey, you're a part of this too. Or those people are not part of this. The difference here is it gets written down. No longer can this describe the current situation, because now it will always just describe the situation at the time. This is the transformational aspect of literacy. Ong describes this well by saying, literacy separated the knower from the known. Now, knowledge did not exist by someone telling it to you or you experiencing it. You could write it down. It could sit separately. One of the aspects of literacy that makes it so different from all the other mediums and the polar opposite to orality is that it completely isolates you from your environment. When you are reading and writing, you're removed from everything around you, purely what you see on the page and what you're working out in your head. When you're writing things down, your audience is not sitting in front of you. You have to imagine how they're going to respond to it, make sure your instructions are clear. This promotes things like logical thinking, which just do not exist in pre-literate societies. This is well documented, or well illustrated by Alexander Luria. I use this all the time. It's a fascinating study that he was able to do when he went to remote regions of the USSR and interviewed people that had no literacy near them, had no exposure to it, and would pose simple logic questions like, all bears in the north are white. A friend who lives in the north sent a letter saying he had seen a bear. What color was the bear? Jake? When he asked this question, the first response, well, one of the responses was, how should I know? Ask your friend, right? No one had said they had actually seen the bear, so no one had experienced it. That's not knowledge. They don't know who this voice is saying that all bears are white. It has no purpose to describing their environment. But the second person had traveled and had experienced, had been exposed to literacy, though he was not literate himself. He responded, to go by your words, they should all be white. Didn't internalize that knowledge, but understood the basic concept. And this really sets that continuum that orality and literacy set against. Polar opposites that promote very different traits when we're wielding them or exposed to more of them in society. But orality, but obviously when literacy came onto the scene, it was still held by a tight number of elites. It was not all throughout the culture, but they would be exposed to it little by little until things like the printing press exploded. And today, very few people cannot read and write. So, why would we be going backwards? This is where McLuhan is very helpful and was such a creative thinker. And one of the things he isolated on what specifically made radio and television different is that it was pulling back these new senses, where reading consistently removed us from the environment. Radio and television were bringing back the acoustic space, as he called it, bringing us backward. He created a framework for this, that any new medium is obviously going to enhance the one before it. That's why we're using it. But it will also retrieve some aspect of it. And with each of the new mediums, it's been chipping away more and more at the dominance of literacy, specifically the removal of this isolation from the environment. This was a relatively slow process because TV and radio actually have a lot of common similarities to how you experience reading and writing. One, it has a clear beginning, middle, and end. When you're the creators of a TV and radio program, not talk radio, but they do not have the audience sitting there in front of them. They have to think through how they're going to be experiencing. But that all changes with the internet. Now people could respond to you right away in your comment section with a blog post right away. Comments on videos, video responses, and now streaming where they're literally sitting alongside you commenting and you can see that response. Everything moved from being this isolated event to one large conversation. And as we accumulate all this knowledge by having someone tell it to us, by being able to converse with it, we've been stitching back knowledge back to the knower. Andre Mir has a quip where we're living in an age where now it's not Plato is dear to me, but dearer still is the truth. It's the truth is dear to me, but dearer still is Plato. When we're constantly in conversation, The aspects of that medium are very important. Is this person trustworthy? That will affect whether you actually believe in this knowledge. And that's going to be very awkward for things like business and institutions like government, which are very abstract concepts, right? They're written in an authoritative, objective voice, very much not human. And so that used to be the signal that something was well thought out. It took so much effort to write into this, well backed up by data. Now it's, do you like the banks? It's, well, I don't know. Do I like Jamie Dimon? Do I like this other CEO? It's whomever the messenger is in their mind making up these opinions. For businesses, one of the areas that there's a lot of tension is that some of our classic assets that show a lot of thinking, like project plans, strategy briefs, are living in a world where we're conversing every single day. All of our communication is in chat, back and forth, and then someone tosses over this well-written, objectively voiced document, and it's like, who is this? Who wrote this? I can't vet it. I don't trust it, right? And we have this really odd area where we're lacking this proof of thought. No longer can I trust that when someone sent something over the fence, that they really thought about it. And this is a shame, because this is what Eric Whiffen kind of highlights this tension well. The whole point of these documents was less the asset than the creation of the asset, forcing someone to sit down and think through what the project plan was going to be. Because obviously, as soon as you put it down to ink, timelines change, but you had someone that could adjust to it. Without that trust in these documents, meetings have replaced them. We need someone to sit there and personify this knowledge to know that it's real. Humans have been through this before. An anecdote from Michael Clancy talks about the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons and the struggle with Anglo-Saxons because they had complete distrust in any documents, written documents and trials. They would force actual witnesses to come up anytime they were introduced. The Normans were able to solve this by any time a contract was written, putting an actual valuable something and tie it to it. This is an axe handle, a sword handle. It is you saying, hey, this has value, pay attention to it. And I actually think that's what we're missing. Meetings are extremely inefficient, but they're also clearly creating a need for us to say, hey, you understand this, I need time to download it. I ain't reading that too long. So I've tried to dive into this, right? Used to be the person, too, that would say this meeting could have been an email. It could not have been an email. I wouldn't have read it, right? When I lead these meetings now and have created something, this is an opportunity to persuade. It also is the opportunity, like that story of the ganja from Walter Ong. When they created this, it immediately becomes out of date. It describes a past time. This is our opportunity to say, hey, this still describes the current situation we're in. We made these personas 2 years ago. They're still relevant. Let's use these parts. Bring it to the current situations to make it living again. And be repetitive. Repetition never ruined a prayer. I will have to say at least 2 more times that 11 years ago a photographer called me conventionally attractive for you to remember. And it will work. Let's dive into it. Another aspect is brands responding to this in a different way. This is something that's going to come up a lot. Jessica's going to go to the numbers on how bold this transformation is. I'm not much of a numbers person, so I'm going to leave that to her. But you can see this. Brands and companies have built these huge content teams that provide valuable content, but they're hitting a wall without a persona they can stitch this to, without a spokesperson. There's this great quote in here about it's so much more than a copywriter. This is bringing to life scenarios, situations, and opportunities. Knowledge has to be grounded in a situation people can relate to, that they can imagine themselves experiencing. 10 ways to optimize your 401k is not going to be as valuable as... I tried to ad-lib that. I actually don't have a good example for that. We'll workshop that later. But the storytelling we all had, right? You could apply many things that came up from 50s and 60s advertising here. You could pull back to the Odyssey to say, what is good storytelling? Make it memorable for people. Bring it to their real lives. Bring characters that are interesting. This is a particularly difficult trend for me with data because it is the most abstract area. It's really hard to make data storytelling. It's been a trend for years. Attempts like this to make it more visual still rely on things like very abstract categorization. They're always separate from people's workflows. And no matter how much I try to bring this closer to people, what I always hear back is, I just want it to tell me what to know. I just would like it to tell me what I need to know. And they're right. This is not a great way to download information anymore. But we can't compromise the authority of this data or the integrity of it. But fortunately, now there is a great way to chat your data. There is ways to send this in. This is the one slide I designed, and obviously it's garbage, but this is an example of me interacting with a dashboard and having it tell me the insights of the day. There's some dangers to this, which we'll get into, but we've really started to reevaluate our role and actually start to think about data as content. It's not fair, even with the chatting, to ask people to go there and ask the questions. If we know the insights, we need to be able to push it to them, and we need to be able to relate it to their specific situations to make it valuable, just as if we were in the room. But doing this comes with obvious dangers. You can't have 50,000 different versions of how the company is performing. You need to be able to still tell these common threads, what the common metrics are. To do so requires things that we've been saying for decades, right? Your data needs to be clean. It needs to be cataloged well. You need to have good structures in place. You need to have good security in place. But there's this layer now where you can truly make it interactive and participatory, and it needs to be responded to. We can't just sit back and expect people to come to us anymore. We can't expect the value that we brought when we thought through of this brilliant way to bring the data is doing the work to anyone else as a signal. So 3 shifts that I'll promote here. 1, there's still a lot of value to reading and writing. Just recognize that a lot of that value is to yourself. It's tremendous to be able to truly know something inside and out. But a lot of that value is being on your feet, soaking in new information from the environment. You have a responsibility to persuade people. Now, it seems like the best option is through actually being present, showing them that it means something, and offering them a story. You need to validate. You can't just assume that your data speaks for itself. And dive into these things. I will not compromise data by letting something make a lot of assumptions about it. There's a lot of things you need to control, but you can make it conversational. We have to allow people to participate in this, and with a lot more than a drop-down. I'll leave you with one thought, which is 11 years ago, a photographer called me conventionally attractive. And it's very important. Now, some of these traits are coded as negative, right? Some of it makes me uncomfortable, and McLuhan is a very helpful figure for this. He actually is thought of often as a technology optimist. He was very positive about the aspects of different senses being brought in through our communication. Things like visuals and auditory signals led to an explosion in creativity that he seemed to call in the 60s and 70s. But he was quite nervous about it. He did not let his kids engage with television. He himself did not like it. But he decided that the best way to deal with those feelings was actually dive in, to truly understand what was happening and try to control it. And that's all of our option too. Some of this might seem not right, but just declaring something not right doesn't do anything. We need to understand the elements of it so that we can mix the things that we think should stick around with the things that are being forced upon us in our environment to create something new. It's the oldest story in the book. Thank you.
Stay up here. You're not going anywhere yet, Ben. All right. Who wants to know Ben's photographer first and foremost? No? All right. Any questions? No?
Sorry.
All right. Kunal and Dennis in the back. I warned you guys I was going to pick on you next. If you don't know Kunal and Dennis, they work for FedEx. They collect millions of data points on a daily basis. So I'm very curious, this idea of being able to tell a story or be conversational with your data, how you guys react to that.
Yeah, he's punching me right now because this is what I should have been doing 2 years ago. But I think AI is going to be the one that's going to be different. One, we work with Ben in our data space, so he knows our data as much as we do. The area that we're really going into is killing dashboards. I think the age of the dashboard is starting to come down. And now we just have to think creatively, what is the interface that's going to replace that same thing? What are the actionable outcomes that come from a often people create a dashboard because it'll be, I'll create a dashboard because someone can look at it and make decisions. Guess what? There is no someone in between. You have to be the one who, after the dashboard is created, has to be the one to actually make the action. So really where I think the future is the demise of the dashboard is apparent, but I'm curious and open to learning from the next day and a half is what are my options? Where do I go from there? Now that I've made that the premise, how do I go from there to making stuff actionable?
Yeah, I think, obviously we agree because we work all the time, but dashboards were always transitory. Is that a word?
Yeah. So smart.
One of the reasons why they were needed is to process all the data at the point of delivery is difficult, and so you created these very powerful engines and then very limited design skills to it, or design abilities to it. But it did give access to data that wouldn't have been available without it. But we're dealing with a lot of false starts where we're delivering a dashboard to the people that need to make a decision, and we can only help them so much to actually make it integrated into their workflow. It just, anywhere where I'm forcing someone to go somewhere else to get it, I'm trying to get rid of. So much of these decisions now we're pushing away from centralized cloud-based experiences to integrated local machines to allow a lot of your processes to run. And you can't have it sitting outside. But the benefit is I actually do think we're in that transition. I don't know that chat-based interfaces are going to be the UX solve for this, but I do know that it's solving one specific demand, which is I'm tired of onboarding myself every single time to these categories that don't speak to me what the actual action is that they're measuring.
Is this working? Yeah.
Go ahead, Dennis.
So I ask Kunal all the time and myself, like, okay, instead of looking at the dashboard, obviously, I just want to ask a question. I have a business problem, I need an answer, and I don't have time to dig into the dashboard and, pull up whatever it is. I don't even know how to use it half the time, right? So I want to ask a question. What is the trend, or which customer does this, or how many calls? Whatever the question is, I want the answer, right? So I think that what we just said, that the AI will help us get that data, get that answer, right? Hopefully all your sources are correct, so you get all that. I will say though, Kunal just called dashboard is dead and all that. But if you look at the dashboard, right, what that helps visually, right, is asking more questions. Right? If I'm just going with AI on the data, I'm just asking the question, I'm getting that one answer, right? Will it prompt me to do more? Like, oh, what about this, what about that? Probably yes. But if you have visual and you see comparisons or trends or whatever, right, that sparks like, oh, what about that? Oh, what happened in the business when that happened, and so on and so forth. So I don't know. I'm not saying like the dashboard is dead. It's dead for what I need Kunal to go do right now. But I think it's a medium. It's a right medium still to keep asking questions.
No, I'm with you. One of the things that's difficult about business is, unfortunately, actually, so few things do die. They just get added onto. And so that is an exact scenario where, all right, you now got an initial response to what your question is, but you have a next step and a next step that you need to dive into. At some point, chat's not a good experience for that. You do need to just visually see a lot of it plotted out. And so there's still going to be a role for these things. And so everything is just very additive, another layer to try and solve this one more problem. And I think that's the case. These were created for analysts, and it's a very specific mindset, diving through a lot of data. Once you get to the questions where you need that, there's very few things aside from a spreadsheet that accomplish it.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, it's going to be more, Dennis, to your point, probably role-based, right? If you're at this level, you need to be able to see the data to tell what story it tells to you and judgments you can make from that. Potentially, if you're a lower down, more tactical person, you just want the answers for your next action that you're going to be taking. So having that, the personas, the role-based, the knowledge of that, I think is how that might be an unlock for some of it. Other questions? Zach in the back.
I was just going to add, maybe it's all the above.
No.
Maybe it's a oral tradition wrapped around the data. and interaction as well. So you're getting not a static dashboard that's fixed in certain data points or a certain role, but you're getting access to data that you can then manipulate and interact with in a more human way. I'm probably setting myself up for some project that I'll have to do, but I don't know, just throwing that out there. Yeah.
I'm thinking about this opportunity that we had a handful of months back with an energy company where we were working with them on interactive dashboards where people could actually collaborate with those dashboards. So for individual roles, you'd have your own dashboard. You'd be able to converse with that dashboard and be able to kind of get key actions, but then you could collaborate with folks in different roles that were seeing different pieces of information and bring those different components, almost like individual widgets, a design system for those dashboards, bring them into a centralized place and have a conversation across roles, across functions. That feels like this lily padding opportunity, I think, that AI could allow for these reactional interfaces that happen based on the situation that you're in that moment to support a conversation versus to just draw inferences. I'm curious if you have a thought.
No, one of my hobby horses is trying to use the concept of the Bloomberg terminal and bring it to businesses. It's difficult because they've thrown billions at it. It's difficult to create the interface for it. It's difficult to have a team large enough to support it. But that is what it does, right? One, it supplies you with information. Two, it lets you be creative with the information they're supplying and allow you to collaborate it and monitor things at the same time. It is the perfect concept for it from power users, right? And it also serves two sides. One, you can collaborate. Bloomberg has the famous chat terminal that everyone uses, status symbol. But the other side of it, I just forgot as it was in the middle of it. But the other side of it is it has all these shortcuts for power users, right? So this is the part where you don't want to get in their way either. There's a lot of value to logical interfaces and these things, and that when you know them and have internalized them, you can work extremely fast, much faster than chatting back and forth. So it is one of those areas where I think there is a prototype for it. It's extremely hard to manage and wield. But it's there, and it's something that my team is constantly trying to figure out how can we work toward it, and that was our first attempt at it.
All right, thank you very much, Ben.